Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney at the firm. Today's review, we're going to be looking at some terms of service that are artificial intelligence related. So I'm just going to hover over the platform. Okay, we've updated our terms of service, acceptable use policy and sub-processor list here. Okay, so we're on the terms of service. I'm going to hover over the solutions that they offer. So they have solutions for financial services, franchise, retail. These are the industries. Let's look at the actual platform. So some of the applications they have: automate local SEO, search engine optimization and improve visibility, monitor and respond to reviews at scale. Now, this is interesting. I don't know how each of these applications work. One of the things I do at my firm is I always ask clients to list out how their products work, because the minute I saw the word reviews, it potentially gave me insight into the fact that it may be that this application pulls information from other platforms, like maybe Amazon reviews or Facebook reviews. I'm not sure where, but the fact that there's going to be information that's pulled or integrated into this application immediately tells me that there is going to be personal data in scope. Now, I don't know the workings of the artificial intelligence. However, I know that there's going to be personal data. You cannot do business in 2026 without personal data. Where do I come in? As a lawyer, I'm able to give advice to clients on how to use personal data so that they're compliant with the data protection laws, because there are laws on how you can use personal data within your organization. Now, again, this is geography dependent. Most times when we do these reviews, I'm not able to have insight into the geographies where these platforms or solutions are offered. However, sometimes there are details in some of the language in the privacy notices that are presented on the site. Sometimes they will explicitly reference things like, Chinese residents or European Union residents, sometimes, not all the time. All I can give an opinion on is overall foundational privacy principles that impact every single privacy law from geography to geography. We've got things like transparency. That is a no-brainer. That is in every single piece of privacy legislation. Notice, having to present notice if you're going to process personal data. Those are foundational principles that transcend any privacy legislation. Now, where it becomes a bit more of a nuance for organizations is if they are processing personal data in one country versus another country. If they're choosing to offer their application in the United States, there are privacy laws that are associated with processing in the United States. If they are going to offer their applications in the European Union, the types of information that they process as it pertains to the reviews, if they're pulling that into the application or the reviews are actually being generated within the application, that's a different consideration for the organization. So I'm not going to spend too much on this. I wanted to look at the actual terms of service because the use of artificial intelligence is going to become more and more pronounced as we continue going through 2026. I think it's valuable for customers. Let's say you are a customer of this organization. You need to know what it is that you're signing up for and how it influences your own obligations, whether it's from an artificial intelligence perspective, obligations, because there are AI laws. And then if it's from a privacy perspective, right? The reason we talk about artificial intelligence as a privacy company is because, like I mentioned, the use of artificial intelligence is oftentimes influenced by data. Now, it might be data that is not personal data, but it generally, in most instances, is influenced by some type of personal data, whether it is allowing a user to log into the instance, whether it is that it ingests personal data and provides an output. That processing activity has to be something that is considered by not only the customer, but also the vendor, the supplier. That's why these terms of service are valuable. Although this is not a traditional privacy documentation like a privacy notice. If you've seen on this channel, I've done reviews of notices that are privacy related, notices that are cookie related. I've done reviews of cookie consent management process flow. We've looked at the traditional privacy documentations, but the terms of service are influential because customer needs to know what it is that you're offering and what terms they're signing up for. If you're signing up for the terms related to a platform or a solution, there is going to be an influence of personal data in the terms you sign up for. And you as a business need to be able to evaluate your risk obligation and then your legal obligation under the data protection laws. In addition to that, you need to be looking now more and more so closely at artificial intelligence obligations as well, because those are separate, but they're influenced heavily by personal data, which is why we're talking about it on this channel. So existing customers, these updated terms of service will apply upon renewal of your service. Let's get to the privacy piece. So I mentioned this just a couple minutes ago about personal data, right? That is what we do at this firm. We do personal data. We teach businesses how they can use personal data, what it is they're signing up for. As part of your privacy program, you need to be able to understand how your personal data needs to be treated, the obligations you need to place on your vendors if you're providing them your personal data, and whether or not you are going to proceed with certain terms that may be different to how your organization treats personal data, because ultimately you as the customer are still responsible. Even if you were to upload your personal data to this platform and it is the information associated with your customers or it's the information associated with your employees, you're still responsible. The responsibility is not exclusively on your vendor. And that should form a key component of your privacy program. When you're doing these contractual reviews, you need to balance the risk, just like any other stakeholder within your organization. When you're doing things related to sales, you balance the risk. When you're doing things related to marketing, you balance the risk. Same with your privacy program. Okay, so we've seen what the definition of personal data is, and we've also seen the designation. This organization is your service provider and data processor. Now, you might be asking, why have they used two different terminologies? I talked about geography at the beginning of this review. Service provider is generally language that indicates that an entity is a vendor providing some type of service in the United States. This language is used in US state privacy legislation. The definition of data processor is a term that is used more in the European Union, based on the requirements of the data protection law in the European Union. So what does this give us instance into? It is likely and possible. I can't know because I don't see the internal documents. This is just an organization I found on the internet. But the use of these separate terminologies gives me an inkling that these platforms are being provided at least in the United States and at least in the European Union. Now, what does that mean in terms of obligations and privacy program considerations? It means a couple things. It means that this vendor has obligations under the European Union data protection law. It also means that they have obligations in their capacity as a service provider in the United States as well. That's very important because you as a customer also need to be taking your own notes. Let's say that you're not in the United States and you're not in the European Union. Maybe let's say you're in Latin America, you're in Brazil. You might be wondering, what does this terminology mean to me? And is this vendor going to take into consideration the personal data that is originating in the Latin America region in their terms of service? You need to be considering that because your obligations don't change in Brazil just because you're using a provider that offers services in the US and in the European Union, right? You need to take that into consideration. Let's get into more of the personal data. That's what we look at. Restricted information. Again, in this non-traditional privacy documentation, we're seeing things like social security numbers, passport numbers, military numbers, voter numbers, driver's license numbers. All of these identify an individual, and you need to be taking insight into it because they've deemed this to be restricted information per the terms of service. Now, I am a big proponent of organizations having language in their terms of service that provide definitions, because what this organization constitutes restricted information may be different vendor to vendor. And you as a business need to take note of that. Let's say you want to use this platform. Let's go back to this. And I keep referencing the applications because they're so instrumental in you doing your own risk analysis on whether this is a vendor you want to do business with. They do something that's called chat that converts website visitors into leads. So they offer some type of application that has a chat function converting website visitors. Website visitors are individuals, so there's going to be personal data associated with this type of processing activity. And then they're saying they convert it into leads. Your organization needs to look at this and then look at these definitions and see if this is something that is acceptable within your organization. Can I accept the provisions that address restricted information per this specific vendor? You need to be doing that for each of your vendors because, again, you have obligations in your geographies where you are providing your personal data. Let's say, for instance, you're a US organization and you want to liaise with this vendor. You want their solution or platform. You need to look at what is your intended use? What is your use case for this solution? And is it in adherence, one, to the data protection laws you have obligations to, but also the terms that your vendor is listing out for you? So if we see the term restricted information, we already know what it means because they've added definitions, which I think is very, very, very good. All right, let's talk about user. Each of these groups, each of these individuals are individuals. An employee is an individual. They have personal data associated with themselves. Maybe it's an employee ID, maybe it's a business email address, maybe it's a business telephone number. These users are going to be addressed within the terms of service, because what this vendor is going to be articulating to their customers is, this is how we use user information. Are you okay with this? You need to have a checklist as a business and as a customer. Am I okay with how they're proposing to use the personal data? And does it align with my own privacy program? You need to have your own privacy program. You don't want to be signing up for any type of vendor without understanding how they will be using your data in their provision of their service to you. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's look at some more of these privacy pieces. Okay, let's talk about subcontractors. I've talked about subcontractors when I've done reviews of privacy notices. A subcontractor is essentially an entity that allows a vendor, this is simple terms, right? Every geography is going to have a very specific definition of what constitutes a subcontractor. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to make it easy to understand what a subcontractor is. Essentially, when your vendor is providing you a service, generally your vendor also has other third parties that assist them in providing the service. For instance, a lot of these software as a service organizations, they will use hosting services from organizations like AWS. If a SaaS platform is hosting your data on an AWS server, AWS would be a subcontractor. They are a third party that facilitates the service of the SaaS provider. I feel like that's the simplest term. Now, it does get a bit more complex depending on geography. So it's important for you to check where the supplier is situated and where you are situated to understand what the specific definition of subcontractor is. But the value of discussing this provision, and this is the last thing I'll talk about in this video, is subcontractors also have obligations if they're going to receive your personal data. You need to ensure that your vendor is incorporating contractual provisions that ensure that a subcontractor is going to adhere to data protection laws too. Anyone that receives the personal data down the chain, this is you, the customer. And actually, I might start doing analogies on the channel. You're the customer. You want to obtain a service from your supplier, but your supplier also uses other vendors to enable them to provide you the service. Contractually, you as the customer, you need to look at your privacy program. You need to put contractual obligations on your vendor, and your vendor then needs to relay those same obligations from a privacy perspective onto the subcontractors. Because what happens if the subcontractor encounters a data breach or has a privacy violation or violates the law? You as the customer are going to not have any recourse if you don't put it in a contract, right? You need to be careful of that. And these terms are very instrumental for any type of customer and should always be reviewed from the lens of privacy, because again, you as a customer can't do any business without personal data. Same with the vendor. It's within your interest to ensure that your business can continue to increase its revenue and maintain compliance with the laws, because essentially, if you're not complying with the privacy laws, your business is going to have a difficult time functioning because you rely so heavily on personal data. Everybody does. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have any comments about what I've said, leave a comment below and I'll see you in another video.